All right, everyone, welcome back. And a huge thank you for all the requests to take a deeper look at ANA's recent announcements.
Yeah, this one's got it all, doesn't it?
You said it. To get this deep dive right, we had to pull from aviation news, of course, but also government reports, even some political analysis.
And even a bit of spaceflight and international intrigue thrown in for good measure. You really kept us on our toes with this one.
I know, right? But hey, that's what makes this fun. So our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to help you understand not just what Annie is doing, but the WHY behind it all.
What are they really up to? And most importantly, what should you be paying attention to?
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. First off, NNA Holdings is going on a bit of a spending spree.
A bit. They're buying 77 new aircraft.
That's right. From Airbus, Boeing, and Embraer.
That's a lot of planes. Talk about a serious fleet expansion.
It is. And their press release breaks down how all these new aircraft will fit into their network.
Exactly. International routes, domestic flights, and even a boost for their low-cost carrier Peach. They're really covering all their bases.
And you know me, always got to look at the sustainability angle. And get this, they're aiming for a whopping 91% of their fleet, that's 320 planes, to be fuel-efficient models by 2030.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, though. This order comes at a time when U.S. airlines might actually face some delays on their Airbus deliveries.
Wait, really?
Yeah, you see, there's this whole tariff situation brewing.
Oh, right, the trade war stuff.
Exactly. Both Airline Geeks and AVWeb are reporting that the Airbus CEO has hinted at prioritizing non-U.S. customers if these tariffs start to bite into their U.S. business.
Oh, wow. So ANA could benefit from this trade war. They could get their planes sooner because U.S. airlines are getting pushed back.
It's definitely a possibility. After all, it's all about who gets priority in the production line, right?
Makes sense. Okay, well, moving on from trade wars and production lines, let's talk about something a little different. Safety.
Okay.
The data we got from Morning Consult shows a pretty big gap between what Democrats and Republicans think about the state of air travel safety these days.
That's not so surprising, is it?
I guess not, but Democrats are increasingly worried, especially with some of those high-profile incidents we've seen recently.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, how does ANA's safety record stack up? Is that something they're thinking about when choosing which planes to buy?
It's a good question, but unfortunately the sources we looked at don't really give us a clear answer on that one.
Fair enough.
Speaking of safety, though, remember that Spirit Airlines just won a major FAA safety award for the 7th year in a row.
Can you believe that? 7 years straight. That's got to be some kind of record.
It is. And Travel and Tour World really emphasizes how much this shows their dedication to good maintenance practices. It's a huge deal.
Totally. Clearly doing something right over there.
But get this, while Spirit's winning awards, the U.S. government is actually cutting FAA staff. Yeah. Forbes and Travel Pulse both reported on that. And of course, some experts are worried that these cuts could make things less safe, especially with all the recent incidents we've seen.
Yeah, it's a bit concerning. Makes you wonder if ANA choosing to buy from so many different manufacturers is their way of, spreading the risk a little.
Like what if one company ends up having major safety problems down the line? They've got backups.
Exactly.
That's smart. Okay, time for a little detour. Let's get into some international intrigue, shall we?
Okay, hit me.
So there's this fascinating article about the Avro Aero program.
The Canadian fighter jet.
That's the one. Super advanced for its time, but it got canceled way back in the day. And this article hints that there was some, shall we say, tension between the U.S. and Canada in the aerospace world.
Right, and the Eurasian Times even suggests that the U.S. might have deliberately sabotaged the program to stay on top.
Wow, that's a bold claim. But how does this all connect back to ANA?
Well, remember, ANA is buying those A220s, right? Those are partially built in Canada by Airbus. So the question is, could these old tensions between the U.S. and Canada somehow affect the production of those planes?
Are we seeing international politics secretly shaping ANA's fleet choices?
It's a real possibility. Makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. Okay, ready for a total curveball.
Always. What have you got?
NASA's having some serious issues with their Starliner spacecraft.
Oh no, what happened?
Helium leaks. Astronauts are actually stuck because of it.
Oh wow, helium leaks, seriously.
Yeah, the South China Morning Post had a whole article about it. But here's the weird part. The same article also talks about how Chinese scientists have figured out a way to use helium to make stealth missiles.
That's wild. Talk about two sides of the same coin.
Right. So what's the connection to ANA? At first glance, not much, I know. But if you zoom out a bit, they all kind of touch on this idea of innovation and, global competition.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Right. ANA's new planes are all about fuel efficiency, which of course is a key part of their whole sustainability push. But are they also factoring in all this, well, geopolitical stuff when they make their decisions about which planes to buy?
It really highlights how these seemingly random things can be connected in ways we don't always see right away.
Exactly. All right, before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, one last little mind-blowing tidbit for you.
Ooh, lay it on me.
Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' space tourism company, just launched their 10th crewed flight.
No way! Already.
Yeah, according to space.com and Blue Origin's own announcements. And one of the passengers is actually going to space for a second time.
Wow. Space tourism is really starting to take off, isn't it? No pun intended.
I guess it is. So it makes you wonder, could ANA, with all their focus on pushing the boundaries of aviation, actually be flying people beyond Earth's atmosphere someday?
No, that's a thought.
Okay, so space tourism. It's mind-blowing to think how far we've come. But for now, let's bring it back down to Earth, focus on what all this means for you, our amazing listeners.
Yeah, good point. It's easy to get lost in all these details.
Right. So what are the key takeaways here? What should you really be paying attention to as ANA embarks on this, well, massive fleet expansion?
Well, for starters, it's pretty clear that ANA is aiming to be a major player globally.
Definitely.
I mean, that huge aircraft order and the commitment to fuel efficiency, that sends a strong message.
Yeah, they're in it for the long haul.
Absolutely. And they're smart about it, diversifying their fleet, buying from multiple manufacturers.
Oh, you mean like hedging their bets?
Exactly. They're mitigating risks. Think tariffs, those safety concerns, even those international tensions we talked about.
Right. Like, who knows what's going on with that whole U.S.-Canada thing with the Avro Aero?
Seriously.
Maybe ANA buying the A220s, which are, partly built in Canada, is their way of navigating those waters.
It could be. It just goes to show you, international politics, it affects everything. Even something like which planes an airline buys.
Crazy, right. And let's not forget about all those safety concerns people have, especially Democrats.
Right.
Even if we don't have all the details about ANA's safety record specifically, buying from all these different manufacturers, it could be a way of addressing that indirectly.
Yeah, it's like they're saying, hey, we're not putting all our eggs in one basket.
Right. If one company has problems, they've got options. Which, speaking of safety, is a pretty stark contrast to what's happening in the U.S., wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Spirit's racking up those safety awards, and meanwhile, the government's cutting FAA staff.
It's a weird situation.
It is. Makes you wonder, long-term, is ANA's approach the more, sustainable one when it comes to safety?
That's a great question for our listeners to think about.
It is.
Okay, so ANA is making these big strategic moves. But let's get down to brass tacks. What does it mean for the average person who just wants to, fly somewhere?
Be informed. Don't just look at the price tag when you're booking a flight. Do a little research. See what their safety record is like, their sustainability commitments. How are they handling all these changes in the industry?
Great advice. And ANA, well, they seem to be thinking ahead, that's for sure.
They are, but the question is, how will all this play out in the long run?
Ah, the million-dollar question. And it affects more than just ANA, really. The whole aviation industry is evolving.
Exactly. And ANA's expansion, this is a perfect example of how companies are trying to navigate this, super complex and interconnected world we live in.
So to recap, we've got ANA going all in on expansion. We've got potential tariffs, those lingering safety concerns, and even a little bit of international intrigue courtesy of the Avro Aero story.
A lot to unpack. But before we wrap this deep dive up, there's one connection I think we need to highlight. It might not be obvious at first glance.
Oh, I love it when we do this. Connecting the dots. What is it?
Well, remember how we talked about ANA buying from multiple manufacturers as a way to manage risk, right? What if there's another layer to that? What if it's also a way for ANA to be seen as more, neutral on the world stage?
Okay, I'm listening. Explain that one to me.
Well, think about it. By not being too dependent on any one country for their planes, ANA kind of avoids getting stuck in the middle of, trade wars or political fights.
I see what you mean. They're hedging their bets no matter what happens with, global politics.
Exactly. And that sends a powerful message, especially when things feel so, divided in the world. It shows they're committed to working with everyone.
That's such a good point. So you're saying it's not just about the practical stuff like logistics and costs.
Right.
It's a statement about ANA's independence, their ability to operate globally without being tied to any one country's, well, agenda.
Exactly.
Wow. I hadn't even thought about it that way. It really shows you how business decisions, they can be influenced by so much more than just, like, profits.
Absolutely. It's a reminder we live in a complex world. Things that seem totally separate, they can be linked in ways we don't expect. True. Okay, so we've looked at things from ANA's perspective, but let's turn things around. What does this all mean for you, our listeners? What's the takeaway for your everyday life?
Be informed. Be engaged. Don't just take the news at face value, you know? Think for yourself. Question things. And try to see the connections between things that, at first, seem completely separate.
Love that. And you never know, you might uncover something really interesting along the way.
Exactly.
You've given us a lot to think about. But what about ANA specifically? What do you think about their future, given everything we've discussed?
Well, they're definitely making bold moves, positioning themselves for success. But let's be real, aviation, it's unpredictable.
Oh, tell me about it.
The economy, global politics, technology, those environmental rules that are constantly changing.
Right. It's a lot.
It is. So ANA seems to be on the right track, but their success will depend on how well they adapt, how much they innovate.
Which brings up another big question. Technology is evolving so fast. What role will things like AI and automation play in aviation's future? Ooh, that's a good one. We're already seeing AI being used for flight planning, navigation, even customer service. But as it gets more advanced, I mean, it could completely change the game.
Imagine planes piloted by AI. Less human error, potentially even safer.
Right. Or think about personalized in-flight experiences curated by AI.
Yeah, catering to each passenger's, individual needs.
Exactly. And for ANA, as they keep growing and modernizing, they'll need to stay ahead of the curve on all that tech stuff.
Otherwise, they'll get left behind.
For sure.
We've just scratched the surface here, haven't we? There's so much more to this story.
There is. But for now, let's try looking at this from a slightly different perspective. We've talked a lot about economics and technology, but what about the human element of all this?
I think it's time for our listeners to, take the wheel a bit. We've laid out the information, the context, the different perspectives.
Right, now it's your turn.
Connect those dots, think critically, form your own opinions.
Don't just passively listen, really engage with what we've talked about.
Exactly. What stood out to you? Did anything change your mind about something? What new questions are popping up?
And don't be afraid to, dive deeper on your own. That's the best part.
That's how you learn. Go down those rabbit holes. You never know where you might end up.
Maybe you get fascinated by ANA's sustainability efforts and want to see how that all works.
Or maybe you want to learn more about those international aviation rules.
Or hey, maybe you're suddenly super interested in AI and how it could change air travel.
The point is, go for it. This is just the beginning, a jumping off point for your own exploration.
And remember, knowledge is even more powerful when you share it.
Talk about it with your friends, your family. Debate those different viewpoints.
Share what you've learned, what questions you have.
Let's keep this conversation going. Because, let's face it, we're all connected in this big, complicated world.
And the more we understand about it, the better.
Absolutely. Okay, so before we officially sign off, I want to touch on one more thing. That link between business and, global politics, it's fascinating.
Oh, yeah. Like how ANA is making these fleet choices partly to kind of stay neutral on the world stage.
That really blew my mind.
It's a subtle strategy, but it's powerful. And it makes you wonder, as the balance of power in the world shifts, away from the U.S.
Like we were talking about earlier.
How will that affect the whole aviation industry?
Will we see more companies trying to do the same thing ANA is doing? Spreading things out to avoid getting caught in the middle of all the political stuff.
It's definitely something to think about. It shows how companies, even those that don't seem political, they have to be aware of what's happening in the world.
It's not just about making money anymore. It's about understanding the bigger picture, those global risks.
Exactly. And I think we'll see more and more of that as globalization keeps changing things. The world is becoming even more interconnected.
So to wrap this all up for our listeners, here's the big takeaway. The world is in flux, and aviation's changing right along with it.
ANA is doing what they need to do to adapt, making those big decisions that factor in everything from economics to politics to technology.
And we can't forget about those growing social and environmental concerns either. It's a lot to keep track of.
It is. But hey, that's the world we live in, complex and dynamic. The more we learn about it, the better prepared we'll be.
So, to our amazing listeners, keep those questions coming. Keep exploring. Don't be afraid to dive deep. There's a whole world of fascinating things out there waiting to be discovered.
And we'll be here to help you make sense of it all.
Until next time.